Well, welcome everybody. It's an absolute delight to introduce today's speaker, Schenk. Just a personal note, Beat was my first mentor after I finished grad school, and it's fantastic to see him. Beat is a partner and director of digital design at Bjarke Ingels Group, New York City, focusing on architectural detailing, conceptual technical analysis, code, zoning, life safety and accessibility compliance reviews, work plans, project scheduling, building systems research, and construction administration. Beat joined BIG as a licensed architect and a senior project manager in 2010, where he led numerous high-profile projects, including the East Side Coastal Resiliency, Big U, Via 57 West Residential Tower in New York, and the Tella Sky Tower in Calgary. Prior to his current role, he worked in a variety of healthcare, educational, and cultural projects around the globe. Beat has more than 20 years of experience as a project architect and designer, and has sharpened his skills while working on many notable buildings in North America, Europe, and the Middle East. Beat's collaboration with BIG dates back to 2000, where he worked alongside Bjarke Ingels on the Seattle Public Library in Seattle, Washington, while at Office for Metropolitan Architecture in Rotterdam, Zurich. So please join me in welcoming Beat Schenk.
Thank you, John, for the kind introduction. I arrived this morning and we had a small tour around the school, and I'm blown away by seeing all these physical models and drawings and sketches, which I really love very much. BIG. So Bjarke and I, we met while working at REM's office in Rotterdam in '99. And after we finished the Seattle Public Library, Bjarke moved to Denmark, and I moved to Boston because my wife went to the school at the GSD. And so our path crossed again in 2010. In the meantime, the office grew quite dramatically from the first time when we started in 2000, when Julia Smith and Bjarke moved back home. Now we have an office in Copenhagen, which is our headquarters, Barcelona, London, in Europe, and in the US we have New York and Los Angeles, which we started this month, actually. And in Asia, we have Shenzhen. We tend to think of us not just as architects, but we also have multidisciplinary practice. We have engineering, structural, mechanical in Copenhagen, and hopefully it will move into the US, but because of legal restrictions, it's much more difficult to get it over here, but we're working on it. We have landscape departments, urban department together, which is kind of the same in our view, where we create and build public and urban space. And lastly, we do products, in-house products. We have 23 partners around the globe, and we have 700 employees, which I have to say, without employees, we would not be here where we are today. They're really the bedrock of our company. They are bright, smart individuals, and I'm so glad to call them all colleagues. As I said, we work on all types of scale in our practice. We have from product to unitized products to buildings, neighborhoods, cities, and regions. And we also work abroad with projects on the Moon and Mars together with NASA as we speak. This one here is our New York City office space. We moved in, since we moved to New York, we moved 7 times. It started out in my kitchen, and then it grew up we grew up and moved around, and finally we found a place in Brooklyn, in Dumbo to be precise, where we have around 160 people working with us there. The company, as I said, is rooted in Denmark, and I'm going back. So in 2000, when Bjarke moved back to Rotterdam, we won this competition here. It was a public bath. It was unexpected. So when the clients came to the office, there was only Bjarke and Julia the Smiths, and so he felt that morning before the meeting, he needed to drum up some of his colleagues to make it sound like we were an office. So they came, and we had 4 people sitting around a desk, and then for some reason Bjarke had to leave, and suddenly the client asked the other guy on the table, he needs to go to the restroom, whether he knows where the restroom was, and he didn't know because he never worked in the office. So they found out, but they were gracious, and at the end it died. But we have a good relationship with this client till to this day. The first real project that was built was the Maritime Youth project, where it was a competition. They gave us a project or a program and a budget, and the budget was essentially 1/3 of the budget was to remediate the soil. And we felt that once we start to use that money to dig out soil and put back better soil, we then sit down with engineers and come up with the solution to, rather than digging it out, we kept it. So we put over the entire soil that top layer of wooden structure with steel, and therefore we were able to provide the public a space for them to use, and the building had still enough money for us to actually build it. It's still to this day it's used quite heavily by young people of all ages actually, and with it there is a canoe storage facility attached. Soon after, we got invited to do another project in the Copenhagen harbor. We extended the park, which is on the bottom, and introduced a series of public paths, different scales and different functions, and created a public space over the harbor, which up till to that day, nothing was there. And that brings me to the housing projects BIC is working and worked on over time. So in Europe, it's very common that young architects, when they get out, they start with housing projects. And it's not different with BIC. The first few years, as a matter of fact, we build houses and we build apartments. And the first one is the VM house, which consists out of 2 buildings. The black one on this side is a version 2.0 of the of Corby's project he did in Marseille, Unité d'habitation, where he has had planned entire very narrow flats around a corridor, which would not have any daylight or views out. And what we were trying to do is come up with a similar approach where you have a double-loaded corridor, where rather than having like Gorby, when he made it straight, we made it zigzag, so you could have views out and get daylight in, and the corridors became almost like a social space for all the people living there. And it's really remarkable that it's used. People put their bikes up, into the hallways. They sit there. They have parties, and it really worked really well. On the other side, we built the V house, which is facing a public park, and the element which we introduced there was the budget was quite modest. So we always felt that exterior space in Copenhagen was very important. So we wanted to build balconies, but in the beginning they didn't really felt that they had the money and the means to do it, and so we came up with this concept of a wedge-shaped balcony, which we extended up and hung it from the facade. It was really inexpensively done, prefabricated, and what it did was the balconies created a social gathering space for all the people that usually go into their apartments, close the door, and you never see them again. On this development, you really have people sitting on these balconies and talking to each other on weekends and long summer nights. So, for the same client in Copenhagen, right next to the VM house, we built a mountain, it was called. Pretty much the same size as the VM house, but this time he tasked us to include 2/3 of the volume as parking structure. The other ones you only would have access with bicycles. Now he came back and said, I got you something here, but you need to put me parking because people, for whatever reason, asked to have cars. So, and then he came up with a concept where he said, build me a parking and build me the houses, and together that would create somehow this development. We very quickly felt that it was not the right approach. The site just felt we would, put a back to the whole development. So we proposed to him to create the parking structure that is at the bottom, and then we would build his apartments on top of it. And so we went. It's a 9-story building. People can drive up, park their cars, and then walk into the single-loaded corridors from the parking. But they can also, if they come, like most people actually in Denmark, they come by bicycle, they could jump into a cable car that brings them up, and then you can connect back into your flats. The typology which we created was essentially we built houses on top of a parking structure that almost started to take on the same feeling as you have here, where you have single family homes with green space. And in our case, we were able to create that same experience, but on that parking structure. So the density is very urban, but then the feeling is suburban. And we finished this in 2007. Again, the budget was fairly small, but the people really enjoyed it. From there, we were asked by a group of people whether we can do something which we didn't do till that day. They came and they asked us to do a mixed-use development at the edge of Copenhagen. And 2/3 of the development was commercial space, and the rest was were apartments. We looked at the typologies, and we felt that rather than stacking them parallel to each other, we were interested of seeing what happens if we start to layer them on top of each other, which meant that the residential portion of the development got light and air and views, and on the commercial side, on the street level, you got the movement, the almost 24/7 hour type walking around and really anchoring the project to the ground like this. And of course, Denmark is very well known for people to bike everywhere, and we also love this notion that you could actually bike up to your apartments. So, and the site was massively large, so we asked ourselves whether we could still provide people who are, used of riding their bikes everywhere in the city, whether we actually could provide them the same quality on this project. So what we came up with is that we created, when you go back here, we created the building is dipping down, and people actually can ride up their bike all the way up to their flats at the very top. And so it felt that, and in addition, it created this, and that's like 8 stories off the ground. It created those semi-public spaces in front of their entry, and it's quite nice. So when you're there, and even today, people start, when you go for a run, you see like people running up and down. So Denmark is very flat, and when you do serious training, you sometimes need hills, and here we are. We produced a hill for the public to use on their journey. And that's a view from the lake that freezes and becomes a skating park. And then in 2010, the office moved to New York. We got a commission from the Durst organization. They asked us to build a high-rise building. They met the first time in Copenhagen when Douglas Durst gave a lecture about real estate. Bjarke went to see it and asked tough questions, why his buildings look so ugly, whether he could do something about it. And then in 2010, we had an exhibition in New York. We exhibited all our built models. It was all Lego models, and so Bjarke felt it was a good time to give back. So he invited Douglas Durst to the opening, and like everything was Lego models standing around, and suddenly this real estate mogul came in, and he actually enjoyed the exhibition, and then he asked him whether he could come to his office the next day to talk about business. So Bjarke went, and then he told him that he had like this site in Hell's Kitchen in New York on the west side, and he tried to build for a very long time a structure, and the city always shut it down. And so he was willing to try one more time to go back to the city to ask whether they would be interested to do it. So in 2010 we started Via 57 concept design, and the building is over here. It took 7 years to build it. And the concept really was, at the beginning, it was a mid-rise building because Douglas was really afraid of the building that the city would not allow us to build it. And so we developed a mid-rise building because of the sheer size of the footprint, 400 feet by 200 feet. We didn't see how we could make, since it was residential, it almost required to have 2 residential lobbies, which would be very expensive to build, right? And so 6 months into the project, and we already spoke with the city, and finally the city loved the project. Douglas called us up on a long weekend and told us that the numbers would not add up. So he's willing to try one more time to look at the high-rise building, whether we would be up for it. And you have 4 days to come up with a redesign. And says, Jesus. And so there we went, a long weekend. And we came up pretty much with that design. So, and the reason for the geometry is not because we like to create another pyramid in New York. It was really the forces of the different things that happened around our site, which was one. Douglas owned this building, so one of his requirements was we were not allowed to block views onto the Hudson River, right? It was a no-go. So, and then he also wanted, he also wanted to somehow create a mass that didn't again needed 2 lobbies. And so we came up with a concept of perimeter block, and then pulled it up because we had the square feet available to build the size project. And then we also wanted to create views, and since we are working for developer, you always have to think of how you can provide them with. How can you provide them with something that their money gets back to them, right? So we created a series of cockpits, we call them, which is essentially almost like penthouses. Under that roof wall, which we have, it's not really a roof, it's not really a wall, so it was really hard to describe. In the building code, once you have a certain slope, it's not a wall, or it's not a roof, then it becomes a wall. So that's what we did. We had to go through rezoning application in New York. We started in 2012. The lot was M zoning. And C, which is commercial. It had 5.0, and we asked the city to allow us to, almost like add 1/3 or more to the FAR, which then we also switched from M to C. The lot, as you can see, is highly complicated. It's not just one lot, it's multiple lots, so you had to deal with setbacks and rules, which we did, And because we went through rezoning, we didn't have to follow the zoning envelope discussions you have in New York City. We were able to not have setbacks at 85 foot and so on, like you typically would if you go for an as-of-right building. And so in the spring of 2013, it was approved. We pulled the permit and we started construction in March of 2013. And very often people don't know what it means to build, right? So of course you need to follow all the rules, codes, regulations. You need to follow New York City Building Code. They have their own code, so it's not like the state, it's the city. And then you have USPS, you have ADA, and ADA is for the commercial section of a project, which when you do residential, ADA has to conform up to your front door. Once you get into your apartment, then it falls under the Fair Housing Act. And when we started the project, the DOJ, which is running the ADA and the FHA, sued pretty much every developer in New York City for not meeting the guidelines. So when we stepped off the plane in New York, we knew that this was a thing. And we really had to follow it. And it's ADA, if you think ADA compliance is easy or hard, fair housing is even tougher. And so we went through, we followed all the rules and were able to build this building, which the client wanted to use material that are long-lasting. They keep their buildings, they're not selling them, so that's a good thing. So they really cared about the quality of materials and spaces. And the roof being along the West Side Highway was a huge concern of them. And you can see why, because when you come up the West Side Highway, when you have stainless steel, think of Frank Gehry in Los Angeles, you could get a lot of glare and accidents happen. And so the client really said, yeah, it has to be stainless, but we need to find something that mitigates the glare issue. And then also, because it's pretty steep, it does snow in New York, so they were really concerned about ice and snow buildup on the roof. We did a series of tests in Army Corps of Engineers in Washington, Mount Washington. They have a test facility. We went to go and test of how our cleat system on that roof would hold up. And then the last was, and they also had to clean this because it's on the West Side Highway, it gets dirty, and they're expecting to clean that facade slash roof once every year. And so we built probably the second largest roller coaster besides the one in Coney Island, where you would go up. This is the window washing rig. You go up and then you descend down on tracks. And I have never been on this, but it must be frightening to be on that on that mechanism of how you can clean those surfaces. At the very top, you have the cooling towers. After all, New York is steamy and hot in the summer, and it's up there. So in the winter, when they let steam out, I heard that the fire department was called because everybody thinks it's burning down. And then the heart of the development is really the courtyard. And for us, so when we started, we said every apartment needs to have a terrace. Somehow, the Danish are very religious about their outdoor space. They have so few moments a year when they actually can suck up the sun. And so when we got here, and in New York, there were not many high-rises that had balconies. And so the client said, we're never going to do this. Forget about it. And so we fought tooth and nail. And we got the balconies on the roof, and we also got the balconies facing the courtyard. So we have smaller balconies here, and then also because of the fire separation, because it's 60 feet and it's on different lots. We had to get fire separation of 60 feet. That's exactly 60 feet, and then. The moment you get past the bottom of this one, we were able to step out, and the layouts of the apartments were fishbone type layouts. So when you're in your apartment, you actually get a glimpse of the Hudson River, which again adds value to your apartments. So the courtyard is really used, and the Dursts are extremely happy. During the pandemic, they were even more happy because a lot of people who wanted to have some outdoor space actually moved to the development. And that's a view back. Here you see these tracks where you come down, and it's steep. Since it was in Hell's Kitchen, it was an industrial area before, it's like really at the bottom. It's quite far away from any public transportation. So we wanted to use materials that were really part of the neighborhood and fabric of where we built this building. So we went to brick, and I'm happy to see a lot of brick in this school. We used raw materials. In essence, our office, we always tried to not paint the stuff. We tried to keep materials as a material, and we love if it patinas. And of course, nowadays in New York, every residential tower has amenities. All types of amenities. Ours has a half-size basketball court. We wanted to have black floors and white stripes. It was not a good thing, apparently. And then they said, maybe you should play soccer. And then we have a pool. The client also lives in the building, and his son is triathlon or participated in triathlon, so he loves to swim, and so they got a pool here. And then the apartments are pretty modest. They definitely didn't know what they're getting into, the client, but at the end they enjoyed it. And what was funny also how they priced all these apartments. They had no clue. Visually, they could never imagine of what those would look like, and only after they saw it and it was built, that's interesting. So it is interesting how you can teach people, and so that's kind of where that West 57th Street project is. From there, same time, we started the Vancouver House in British Columbia. The site extremely challenging. When you come across from the west side, you come across the highway, and that's how you enter downtown. It had a series of these off ramps, on and off ramps, and the site was like really triangular space, and then setbacks you need to have 100 feet from the street. So apparently the client tried for many years to build something and never piled out that it would meet his budget. So those are some of the setbacks we had. And so that's what you could build, right? So we told him, maybe we could go and make a plea to the city that if we have the 100 feet and we start to play with the 100 feet, that at some point you can get back to your ideal footprint, and you would fit more apartments than you initially had in mind, and that's what we achieved. The project is a mixed use on the bottom. Between those off-ramps, we have all commercial spaces. It was fun to do all the curtain wall detailing, which the team was struggling, and then one day a couple of us jumped at it and we knocked it out like in a couple of months. But it's quite nice. The neighborhood was really kind of dilapidated. It was a lot of crime there, but we also felt that it was not right just to go and do whatever everybody else is doing. And then as you come across, it almost looks like a curtain where it's pulled back, so it's really creates a nice entry into downtown. Same client in Vancouver had a site in Calgary. He had a partnership with Telesky, which is a cell phone company, and so, but they didn't need it to have a lot. But then they only needed the office space, which was at the bottom, and the top we planned some efficient housing layouts, and so those two was the program. We stacked them on top of it, and then we created again some outdoor spaces. We did feel, though, Calgary is really cold, and if New York is cold and hot, this is super cold. And I'm not sure whether they use the balconies as much, but I think it's always nice to have the option if someone wants to have an outdoor space, even if it's only visual accessible. The material is painted. We fought very hard. You lose battles in our profession, and you move on and say, we'll try different next time. But it's quite nice and elegant from the street up, and then the balconies. In Harlem, back in New York, we got invited to do a residential project that would have 25% low-income housing, as it's for really low income, and so the client here too came to us and said, I looked at this site. The architect he had sketches from didn't manage to get him a lot of, apartments, units, and so. And because of New York City, that's an as-of-right building. You have this setback rules at 85-foot street level. You need to set back, and then you can have a dormer condition, which you can come out for 1/3 of the length of the project you could have dormers. But what it does, because it then pushes the rest of the facade back 10 feet, it creates really weird, double-loaded corridor conditions, and you lose a lot of space. So we came up with the idea of what if we blend those dormer conditions and morph them into something that then helps us actually to lay out the apartment on the inside, and you would not have all these awkward shapes, and it would, would be more cost effective, since it's also since the budget was really, really modest, and the city approved it. They said it was they never saw a dormer layout as sophisticated as this one, but they approved it. So, and that's what I'm saying. If we would have dormers, then all this stuff would go in back and forth. And now we're having a double-loaded corridor. We also cantilevered over the building in the back, which belonged to the same client, but it was a different tax lot. The material on the exterior is black and steel, stainless steel black. It's a product from Germany, Pole, which we were very interested. It had the qualities of like almost an elephant skin, which very often with stainless steel you don't really get that. But here, when you're close up, it's really quite beautiful, and zero maintenance. We were told that this would not no change at all. And then because it was in Harlem, there is obviously a long tradition in Spanish Harlem, so we also wanted to bring in colors into the project. So we came up with the idea of introducing really this pattern of tiles that somehow speaks to the tradition and history of Spanish Harlem. So typically residential buildings are built with cast-in-place concrete, because when you have cast-in-place concrete, it's fire-rated, and you don't need layers. Every layer, every additional layer you add is cost. And that's why when you see high-rise buildings, residential, they're mostly concrete. Because this one spanned over an existing structure, we had to worry about weight. And so the back section of that development was all steel, and so that's why you see some of the steel, which is very atypical for residential. Inside, you also have, again, amenities, fairly simple finishes, wood, concrete floor, everything untouched, raw, exposed ceiling, so you see all your MEP on the ceiling, and of course we need to be very careful of coordination, and I can not point this out enough. Architects tend to not care about the MEP guys till we need to submit packages to clients or contractors, and the sooner you work with your engineers, the better your product will be. It had a sauna and a roof pool, which the client really wanted to have, and I think it's being used quite heavily by all the tenants. And then in Amsterdam, and of course, I mean, Bjarke, being part of his life in Holland, he always feels like Amsterdam is the coolest city with Herman Hertzberger and all the old masters Van Eyck, and you name them. And so he was really intrigued when someone came and said, we want to build a project in Amsterdam, but it's going to be over the water, and there certainly will be some challenges. And Holland, half of Holland is anyway below the sea level, so we felt like we can do it. And we came up with that concept here where it is built over the water. As you walk from the city, you can walk up into your apartments, so there are walkways up. And then, since it's now on the water side, there's also a harbor that is now, if you have a boat, you can drive into the courtyard and get off your boat and actually enter the building. And it's just finished a year ago, and it's quite nice. And again, it's really kind of like, besides the structure and building over the water, it's everything is fairly modest. And like any other city in the world or in the Western world, student housing is sparse, and it's unaffordable. And so we talked to the city in Copenhagen and asked them whether they would be willing to give us not land, but water, so we could build a couple of student housings for them. And so that triggered the urban rigor, we call it. It's a series of containers that are prefabricated and placed on these locations. They're actually shipped in, so they're not brought in by trucks, but they're shipped in, and what I heard, I think they get 10 years and then they have to ship them somewhere else. So we're looking for sea and water docking stations for us to bring them there. But it's pretty cool. It's really works really well. It's affordable, and it creates quite nice small communities for students. And then we also do homes for all, and that's social housing in Copenhagen. It is a pandemic, like it is everywhere, where living becomes unaffordable. It's a sad state we are living in, but that's the reality. So we teamed up with this non-profit organization in Copenhagen and developed a prefabricated structure, essentially allowing, this one is the unit, and then whenever they get stacked, so this is 2.5 meters, which is roughly 8 feet, and then when they get stacked, they get 3.5, which is roughly 12 feet. So with very little moves, we were able to come up with a concept that then allowed affordable building being built that actually people can afford. And then we also pushed some of the layouts. We started to push and pull, creating, again, plazas in front of the apartments. So it would create like smaller, intimate gathering spaces for the community. And it turned out, I mean, people really love it. I visited it last year when we had our partner meeting in Copenhagen, and it really is quite beautiful. It's really cheap material, nothing fancy. Everything is like raw, good, so it would last all prefabricated. You see planks, so we have like steel, and then we have concrete planks filled in, partitions, and really the basic, and it creates a home for people. For the same client in Aarhus, we looked at the perimeter block, but then we twisted it to allow the green space and the open space to actually flow into the heart of the building. And in the heart of the building, we proposed with our landscape team in Copenhagen to get like little gardens, little places to rest and really enjoy that development. That too, same concept. We used the same technique. It was really. It was meant, and we always intended this to use it and to modify it and manipulate it, that it creates different environments, even though it's kind of the same. The inside plywood, wood floor, really modest construction, and again with the planks, precast planks, and then we came, and so there was like this notion and narrative that we wanted to also create a system that we could start to use, and really, because at the end of the day, when you can come up with a system that you can place, so you can cut out cost. But it's actually not, and that's maybe what was the intriguing part of the cactus towers, we call them. And now it doesn't.
Close back in your window.
Huh? Ah, yeah. Okay, so we came up with these units that you stack, bathroom stack, kitchen stack, everything stacks, and in the center you have the core, your egress, your elevators, and then what we did was simply we rotated the slabs, but the units themselves, they stack. So that allowed us to have like this crazy exterior of guardrails and handrails, which people use for all types of dangerous things. But on the inside, it's really nothing special, right? So that's where I think that certainly interests us, and when we talk about cost savings, those are the moments where if you come up with something that really can drive down costs, is something we should all aim for. In Texas and Mexico, we started to work on a typology where we are looking at 3D printing, and that really came out of us working for NASA in Houston. We met them a few years back, and they said that they were in the process of printing on Mars and Moon, and we thought, oh, cool. It sounds like something we could help them with. So it became a dialogue, and so last year in December we opened a lunar habitat in Houston inside a hangar where we printed a structure for 3 people to go in there to live there for a year. I'm not sure whether I would have gone, but they went. So I'm curious of how they feel about when they come out around Christmas. But the intention then, we use the technology, and so over the last 3 to 4 years, we kind of tried to come up with ways to use it, and what does it mean, and so we started to look at printing houses. There are limitations as we speak, but the last few years they definitely made advancements. Still, the height is one of the issues because it's essentially a nozzle that prints concrete sausages, and the height restrictions is 12 feet. The roofs we either will use wood or we also printed some of them. Currently, we're working in Mexico to print for a social housing complex. They're printing houses like one in 7 days. Of course, right now the challenge is printing them 7 days, but all the installation MEP is still lagging behind, so it's printed, but then it takes forever to get all the MEP and plumbing all in there. So yeah, so that is in Texas actually. And then so you see this is essentially what they're doing, and I think what's good about it, and we're skeptical, but what's really good about it is because you don't have any waste, right? And a lot of time when you build houses, when you look at your raw material you're using, and then ending up, and then what's left is your waste, and there you really have none. I mean, it's all printed, and that's it. And the insulation, because it has cavities, so they can print inside, outside, and in certain parts in the world, this is pretty good because it really blocks out the heat. Those are the interior. It looks, nothing special, but it's just the technology and playing with technology and really seeing what's possible is quite what interests us. And maybe now leaving the housing, going back to the 3 projects I worked on. So one is we built this public school in Arlington. It was a competition. We won it. It was. It started before the pandemic, and it's pretty much actually ended, or they moved in right when the pandemic hit. But what we tried to do was, so they came with the program. They wanted to have classrooms. They wanted to have, admin, sports, and circulation. And then they had like a sports field here, which they really wanted to do. And so we came up with that idea of creating this fanning out geometry where every classroom would have outdoor space. And so when the pandemic hit, that was really useful because now, even though they wouldn't go there every day, but they would go once a while and use the building just like we imagined that you certainly have kids being out there playing and using the building was quite nice. I went back this year, and someone today asked me, what's your favorite project I worked on? And I must say it's definitely this public school. It was such a delight to see the kids using the building, starting to draw everything onto the wall, and they were so happy. I've never seen that, and also when we planned the building, we said, because now you have all these fanning devices, people would not know where they were. So we said, what about if we use on each level, it will have a different color? And everyone hates it. All the teacher, they said this is a bad idea. They were not for it, and maintenance people, they freaked out, because now if they need to repaint this, it would take forever. And so we pushed them really, really hard. And at the end, and because it is a public school, somehow the architects, besides maybe working for developer, there you still could somehow have an influence. They went for it. And the first thing they told me when we went there this January was they all in love with it. I mean, it was such a good idea to do it, and it really was the intent of having that recognizable when you woke up. They have special needs kids in that public school as well. For them especially, it was so good to have. So, and then we also were asked by the university, UMass, in Massachusetts, to build them, to add an extension to a business school. They needed classrooms, they needed a place for students to hang out, they needed a gathering space, and they needed offices for the dean who was tired of being in this building over here. So we said we can help. It was a competition we wanted with Goody Clancy, our local architect. And so what we did, we extended the existing structure. We wrapped it around, created a courtyard right here. And then we stretched it over to have an enclosed courtyard, because in the spring and it's quite cold up in Massachusetts, and in the fall it's kind of muggy and hot. So that's what was the concept we presented, and it got built. We were there as well, and they actually were telling us that, it was such a success that they now have more students signing up for the class, and they wished they would have, made more classrooms and larger ones, because they now have more students that attend the classes there. And then that brings me to the last project, which I feel like speaks a lot about what BIG is about, what we do. We won this competition, waste to energy power plant. Very often, those type of facilities are in the outskirts of cities. They're wrapped. There's nothing fancy about them. It's a machine, has to function, work as intended. And when we got to enter the competition, we said, let's make something. Let's provide them with a gift that they didn't think of when they announced the competition. And so we came up with this idea of creating a ski slope on top of the power plant, where one could take the elevator up. You go up and then you ski down, and if you want to stay on the steeper hill, you can take the lift back up and go down, or you can go all the way down and then back up. And that meant that the Danes suddenly had a slope where they could train the next Olympians, hopefully, summer and winter, which scares me as a Swiss, since, you know, I cannot imagine getting beaten by a Dane, but maybe it will happen one day, and it would be super cool if it happens on that slope here. And then on the other hand, we also had the fantasy of one of our partners. He's a big climber, and he always wanted to have a place where he could go. And so the city essentially built him a giant playground up on that building. And every time I look at this, and now having spent 20 years in the US, I freak out because I see all the lawsuits, but I guess it's not the case in Denmark, and therefore go for it. It's lovely. That would be it. Thank you very much. Thank you.